In a small, forgotten town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a young woman named Elara, at 22 years old. She was no longer a girl in the eyes of the world, but the hardships of her life had preserved a certain innocence in her wide, hazel eyes. Elara worked as a waitress at the local diner, a place called Rusty's, where the coffee was always burnt, and the patrons were mostly truckers passing through on their way to bigger cities. She had dreams once of leaving this town, maybe going to college, becoming a teacher or a writer. But dreams have a way of fading when reality bites hard. The town was called Willow Creek, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but no one really cared enough to intervene. It was the kind of community where secrets festered like untreated wounds. Elara lived alone in a rundown trailer on the outskirts, inherited from her late mother, who had passed away from cancer when Elara was just 18. Her father had left long before that, chasing some illusion of a better life that never materialized. She was tough, Elara had to be, but toughness doesn't always shield you from the darkness that lurks in familiar faces. It started innocently enough, or at least that's how it seemed. There was a group of men in town, led by a charismatic but sinister figure named Harlan. He was in his 40s, owned the auto shop, and had a reputation for being the go-to guy for anything mechanical or anything underhanded. His crew included his brother Zeke, a hulking man with a short temper, and a couple of hangers-on, Tommy, who was always high on something, and Vic, the quiet one who watched everything with cold eyes. They hung out at the diner after hours, nursing beers they smuggled in, laughing too loud, and eyeing Elara like she was part of the menu. One rainy evening in late autumn, as Elara was closing up, Harlan approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, darlin', need a ride home?" "Storms brewin' fierce out there." She hesitated. She knew better than to trust men like him, but her car had broken down that morning, and the walk was 3 miles in the pouring rain. Against her better judgment, she accepted. That was her first mistake. The ride wasn't straight home. Harlan detoured to an old barn on the edge of his property, claiming he needed to grab something. The others were there, waiting like predators in the shadows. What followed was a nightmare Elara would relive in her dreams for years. They overpowered her, their hands rough and unrelenting. The abuse was brutal, a violation that shattered her sense of self. Harlan's laughter echoed in her ears as Zeke held her down. Tommy jeered, and Vic just watched. It wasn't just physical. They taunted her, called her names that cut deeper than any bruise. When it was over, they dumped her back at her trailer like discarded trash, warning her to keep quiet. "Small town, sweetheart. Everyone's on our side." Elara stumbled inside, her body aching, her spirit broken. She curled up on the floor, sobbing until there were no tears left. The next day, she called in sick to work, then the day after. But bills don't pay themselves, so she dragged herself back, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The town whispered rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she was asking for it with her short skirts. Others pitied her but did nothing. No one asked if she was okay. Weeks passed, and the nausea started. At first, she thought it was stress, the trauma manifesting in her body. But a cheap pregnancy test from the drugstore confirmed her worst fear. She was pregnant. The child growing inside her was a product of that horrific night, a reminder she couldn't escape. Panic set in. Abortion wasn't an option in Willow Creek. The nearest clinic was 2 hours away, and she had no money, no support. Besides, something inside her fierce, inexplicable protectiveness stirred. This baby, innocent and unwanted by the world, was hers. She would fight for it, even if it meant fighting the demons that had created it. But survival wasn't easy. Harlan and his gang didn't disappear. They lurked, showing up at the diner, leering at her swelling belly. "Looks like you got a little souvenir," Harlan sneered one day, loud enough for the whole place to hear. Zeke laughed, slapping the table. Elara's boss, old Mr. Rusty, just shrugged. "Boys will be boys," he muttered. Elira knew she couldn't stay. The abuse hadn't stopped at that night. They harassed her subtly, slashing her tires, leaving threatening notes on her door. One night, Tommy cornered her in the alley behind the diner, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You tell anyone, and we'll make sure that kid never sees the light of day." She fought him off with a broken bottle, cutting her hand in the process, but it was a wake-up call. She had to leave, for her sake and the baby's. With what little savings she had, barely $500. She packed a bag and hitched a ride out of town with a sympathetic trucker heading north. Her destination, the city of Eldridge, a bustling metropolis where she hoped to disappear into the crowd. The journey was grueling. Morning sickness hit hard on the bumpy roads, and fear gnawed at her constantly. What if they followed? What if she couldn't find work? Eldridge was overwhelming. Skyscrapers pierced the sky, streets teemed with people who didn't know her name. She found a women's shelter, a place called Haven House, run by a kind but no-nonsense woman named Maria. "We've seen girls like you," Marie said, her eyes sore-funning as she took in Elira's bruised arms and protruding belly. "You're safe here." At Haven House, Elira began to rebuild. She attended group therapy sessions, where women shared stories that mirrored her own abuse, escape, survival. It was there she learned she wasn't alone. The shelter provided prenatal care, and for the first time, she heard her baby's heartbeat. A boy, the ultrasound revealed. She named him in her mind, Aiden, meaning little fire. He would be her light in the darkness. But the past doesn't let go easily. Word got back to Willow Creek somehow, maybe through a mutual acquaintance. Harlan wasn't one to forgive slights. He saw Elira's departure as a betrayal, her pregnancy as evidence that could bury him. One night, as Elira walked back from a job interview at a coffee shop, she spotted Zeke's truck idling across the street. Her heart raced. She ducked into an alley, but they were waiting. The attack was swift. Zeke grabbed her from behind, his arm like a vice around her neck. "Harlan sends his regards," he growled. Tommy emerged from the shadows, knife in hand. They dragged her deeper into the alley, away from the streetlights. Panic surged through Elira, not for herself, but for Aiden. She couldn't let them win. Adrenaline fueled her. She stomped on Zeke's foot, elbowed his gut, breaking free just long enough to scream. A passerby heard, called the cops. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the man fled, cursing. Elira collapsed, clutching her belly, but Aiden was okay. The police took a statement, but without hard evidence. It was her word against theirs. Still, it was a start. Maria helped her file a restraining order, though she knew paper meant little to men like them. Pregnancy progressed, each day a battle. Elira found work as a barista, her shifts grueling on swollen feet. Money was tight. The shelter provided basics. But she dreamed of a real home for Aiden. She enrolled in night classes for her GED, studying by lamplight after long days. Doubts crept in. Could she be a good mother? The trauma haunted her, nightmares of that barn waking her in sweats. Therapy helped, slowly peeling back the layers of shame and fear that had wrapped around her heart like thorns. Maria became more than a shelter director. She was a mentor, a fierce advocate who taught Elira about her rights, about resources for survivors, about the strength that comes from naming your pain out loud. As the months wore on, Elira's belly grew round and heavy, a visible testament to her resilience. Other women at Haven House rallied around her, sharing hand-me-down baby clothes, knitting tiny blankets, celebrating small milestones, like the first kick or the day she passed her GED exam with flying colors. One resident, a former nurse named Lila, checked her blood pressure regularly and reassured her that both mother and baby were strong. Yet the threats lingered. Harlan's reach extended further than Elira had imagined. Anonymous calls came to the shelter's main line, heavy breathing and veiled warnings. "Tell that whore to keep her mouth shut," Maria reported them. changed the number, but the paranoia remained. Elara stopped walking alone at night, varied her routes, and kept a small can of pepper spray in her coat pocket. She refused to live in terror, but caution became her constant companion. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and warmer air, and with it, the due date approached. Elara had saved enough for a tiny studio. Apartment on the edge of the city, cramped but clean. Space with sunlight streaming through one window. She painted the walls a soft yellow, hung curtains she'd sewn herself, and set up a second-hand crib in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was hers, theirs. Labour began on a rainy Thursday in May, just as the first leaves were fully unfurled. Contractions started mild while she was folding laundry, then built like a gathering storm. Maria drove her to the hospital, holding her hand through every surge. The delivery was long and arduous. 20 hours of pain that tested every ounce of Elara's endurance. She screamed, she cried. She cursed the man who had brought her to this moment, but she never gave up. At 4:17 a.m., Aiden entered the world with a fierce cry that filled the room like a declaration of victory. He was small, 6 pounds, dances but perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and eyes that would later turn the same hazel as his mother's. When the nurse placed him on Elara's chest, skin to skin, something inside her shattered and reformed all at once. The trauma, the violation, the fear, it didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed in that instant by a love so vast it felt like it could swallow the entire universe. She whispered to him, tears streaming down her face, "We made it, little fire. We're here." The early weeks of motherhood were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and overwhelming tenderness. Aiden was colicky at first, crying for hours, but Elara rocked impatiently, singing the lullabies her own mother had once sung to her. She learned to change diapers one-handed, to soothe him with gentle bounces, to recognize the different shades of his cries. Exhaustion threatened to drown her, but every gummy smile, every quiet moment when he slept against her heartbeat, renewed her strength. Harlan and his crew hadn't forgotten her, though. A few months after Aiden's birth, a private investigator hired by Maria uncovered something crucial. Vic, the quiet one who had always watched, had a conscience after all. Guilt had been eating at him. He'd recorded part of that night in the barn on his phone insurance, he claimed, in case Harlan ever turned on him. When the PI approached him discreetly, offering immunity in exchange for testimony, Vic cracked. The evidence was damning. Audio of Harlan's laughter, Zeke's grunts, Tommy's taunts, and Elara's pleas, combined with her detailed statement, medical records from the hospital after the assault, and witness accounts of the later attack in Eldridge, it was enough. The arrest came swiftly. Harlan raged in the back of the police cruiser. Zeke tried to run and was tackled in his own driveway. Tommy sobbed like a child, and Vic turned himself in quietly. The trial made headlines in both Willow Creek and Eldridge. Local men charged in brutal assault and attempted intimidation. The town that had once whispered blame now whispered shame at themselves for staying silent. Elara testified via video link to spare herself the ordeal of facing them in person. She spoke clearly, without flinching, recounting every detail while Aiden napped in the next room under Maria's watchful eye. When the prosecutor asked why she had chosen to keep the pregnancy, Elara looked straight into the camera and said, "Because he is not them. He is mine, and no one gets to punish an innocent child for the sins of monsters." The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts: aggravated sexual assault, conspiracy, intimidation, stalking. Sentences were long, decades behind bars with no possibility of early release. The judge, a woman with steel in her voice, looked at the defendants and said, "You tried to destroy a life and ended up creating one that will outshine all of you. Justice didn't erase the scars." Elara still woke some nights gasping, still flinched at sudden loud male voices, still carried the weight of what had been taken from her. But therapy continued, and time did its slow healing work. Aiden grew first steps at 11 months. First words, mama, and then duck. A laugh that could light up the darkest room. By his second birthday, Elara had enrolled in community college, studying early childhood education, with the goal of becoming the teacher she'd once dreamed of being. She worked part-time at a daycare, where Aiden played happily with other children while she earned credits. Scholarships for survivors helped cover tuition, and Haven House threw a fundraising drive that paid for books and supplies. On quiet evenings, Elara would sit on the tiny balcony of her apartment, Aiden asleep inside, and look at the city lights stretching to the horizon. She thought about Willow Creek sometimes, not with longing, but with a quiet resolve. She had escaped its suffocating grip, turned poison into purpose. One day, when Aiden was 4, he asked about his father. They were colouring together, his small hand gripping a blue crayon. Everyone else has a daddy. Where's mine? Elara set down her own crayon and pulled him into her lap. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsed the words 100 times. Your daddy isn't here, sweetheart, she said gently. Some people make very bad choices, and they can't be part of our family. But you have me, and Grandma Maria, and Leela, and so many people who love you. We're your family, and that's enough, more than enough. Aiden considered this solemnly, then nodded. You're the best, Mommy. She hugged him tight, tears pricking her eyes. And you're the best boy. You saved me, you know that. The day you were born, you gave me a reason to keep fighting. Years rolled on. Elara graduated with honours, landed a teaching job at an elementary school in Eldridge, and eventually bought a small house with a yard where Aiden could run and play. She started a support group for young mothers who had survived trauma, sharing her story to help others find their own fire. Aiden grew into a kind, thoughtful boy, good at soccer, better at reading, with his mother's hazel eyes and an empathy that seemed older than his years. He never knew the full details of his conception until he was much older, and when Elara finally told him. At 17, he held her hand and said, I'm proud to be your son, and I'm proud of you for choosing life, for choosing me. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful night, Elara stood in front of her support group and spoke without notes. I was broken once, she said, voice steady. Pieces scattered so completely, I thought no one could ever put me back together. But I learned that healing isn't about becoming unbroken. It's about becoming whole in a new way, stronger at the mended places. And the greatest glue, the most powerful force I've ever known, was love. Love for my son. Love for myself. Love that refused to let darkness win. She looked around the room at the faces of women who had walked similar paths, some still raw with pain, others further along, and smiled. We are not our worst moments. We are the mornings we choose to get up anyway. We are the hands we extend to the next survivor. We are the lives we build from the ashes. Outside, Aiden waited in the car, now a young man with college acceptance letters in his backpack. When she climbed in beside him, he asked, Good meeting. The best, she replied. He started the engine, and they drove home through streets bathed in golden evening light. Behind them, the past receded further into shadow. Ahead lay everything they had fought so hard to earn: peace, purpose, and a love that no violence could ever touch. And in the quiet of that ordinary, extraordinary moment, Elara knew the truth with absolute certainty. They had not just survived. They had won.